Hello, and welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour, the weekly bridge to the future of the piano tech community. I'm David Anderson.
And I'm Ethan Janney. And we're here to ask great questions, and then we'll shut up and listen to some of the authorities, experts, and most outstanding personalities in our little world of pianos.
So, put on your best set of headphones, and let's get started.
Hey friends, how's it going? Good to see you all. Welcome to Piano Technicians Masterclasses, Piano Tech Radio Hour. Good to see you again. I'll spotlight myself. I will just say right off the bat here, please excuse me if you get any issues with my internet. I'm really trying my best today, but I had some problems. So do let me know if you are experiencing problems on your end with my internet signal, and you get to know. And I can't really tell. I can just see that my speed values are very poor, and I'm having glitches. So we're a little late today, getting started. So I will start to introduce things right off the bat here, and as long as I can load up my information on my end, given the issues with the internet, it looks like I should have that. So welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. And this program is one where we gather every Saturday to meet with and learn from the most fascinating and knowledgeable folks in the piano world: manufacturers, rebuilders, musicians, makers of other instruments, and of course, piano techs. Our mutual goal is to become better at our craft, to help each other, and to create an ever more musical world together. Piano Tech Radio Hour is brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, an online learning resource that brings you cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. Find out more at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. Subscribe to this program, Radio Hour, for just $16 a month. Get direct access to each week's private Zoom call, as well as the archival recordings of over 200 episodes in our member area. You can join PTRH at bit.ly/join PTRH, bit.ly/join PTRH. Also, want to give you guys some plugs for some other important information very quickly. Make sure to check out the podcast, pianotechradio.com. If you've been listening to it, if you're a subscriber, you may have noticed we haven't put out an episode for a little bit, just because we've been recalibrating our processes behind the scenes. But we will start to release episodes pretty soon again, and actually at a pretty rapid clip. We'll release some episodes daily for a little while. So keep an eye out for lots of more great content. We'll be reaching back in the archives about 2 years, and then also reaching back about a month. Just going to check in and make sure you guys can all hear me. I'm not seeing any problems. I just saw issue on my end, but I think we're still rolling. Piano Technicians Masterclass.substack.com. We release little snippets of our content from the private member area on our masterclasses, our highest quality, most valuable content. And we create articles around that, give you some really useful information, give you a taste of what's behind the scenes. So if you want to learn more, you can dive in feeling fully educated. You can also make sure and follow us on social media at Piano Tech Masterclasses, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and also we just did our Final Mile Masterclass with Eric Johnson on May 16th. We focused on the highest level performance possible out of your piano. You can watch it now in the member area. You can sign up at bit.ly/PTM-EJ24, PTM-EJ24. And then, of course, we have a online summit, a one-day micro convention that we're going to be doing in June on the 20th with 3 great lecturers and some surprises as well, some surprise content as well as part of that. So make sure you sign up for that. We can talk more about that later. Maybe don't want to waste too much time before we get into introducing today's guest. So today's episode features Alexander Schwarzkopf. Alexander, he's from Colorado Springs, Colorado, where he was raised in a family of artists. His father's an architect, prolific string player from Stuttgart, Germany. His mother was an actress and professional puppeteer. Alexander's first performing in public was at age of 8, and he became a scholarship student in piano at Colorado College at the age of 12. He has since competed and performed in the United States, Germany, Italy, and the former Yugoslavia. Alexander's doctoral research resulted in the publication of a structural analysis for performers, Falco, Steinbach's Figures, 17 Choreographic Etudes for Piano, 2006, and has led to numerous performances and discussions of Steinbach's work, including featuring in 2 performances series in Germany in 2012, giving workshops during the Internationales Clavier Festival, and presenting a lecture and demonstration and performance for the Oregon Music Teachers Association. In 2011, he also recorded an interview and selections of etudes by Steinbach and Chopin for a broadcast of his local NPR station. He's a composer, a performer, premiering his works in the US, Germany, and is also an advocate and commissioner of new music. Currently, in addition to performing and composing, he teaches private piano lessons, facilitates music exploration with children at the University of Oregon Spencer View Co-op Family Center in Eugene, Oregon, where he lives with his family, including his cat Maya. I don't know if maybe we'll bring Maya on as a guest star. We didn't talk about that, but I know there's even more stuff we may talk about today that I didn't really allude to in the bio. But Alexander, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very good.
Aside from the technical difficulties.
Yeah. And I know you're kind of like in your home studio space where I think your piano's right there at our right, your left, which is great to be in your inspirational creative space with you. And I even see behind you on the wall, one of your visual compositions is featured.
That's correct.
Tell us what that is, just because it's right there. What is this flower-shaped object behind you on the wall?
In 2022, well, so to start with, I have been a featured guest performer and composer for the Macrocosmos Project Festival in Portland, which is it was conceived as a contemporary music festival. There's multiple concerts within one night, 5-hour shows. It's a 5-hour section with multiple shows. And so the first year we performed all the 3 books of the Macrocosmos by George Crumb. And this year, actually, we're doing all 4 books of the Macrocosmos as the 10th anniversary of the festival. So it's an outstanding experience. It is one of the premier festivals I've ever played for. The feeling, the movement of the audience, the freedom of moving and experiencing the music from multiple angles throughout the night is just perfect, because you don't ask people to sit still. Anyway, but they do most of the time. So this work originated in 2022 at the request and invitation of the co-directors, Stephanie Ho and Sar Ahuvia, to compose a work in honor of George Crumb as he passed that year. And so I wrote a piece that I initially thought there has to be, well, it's very difficult to write something in homage to a composer of such great innovation. And so what do we do? But I figured that part of my composition would have to be a visual score, because every 4th piece in the Macrocosmos is a symbol. And so he composes works in the shapes of everything from peace signs to interlocking circle figures. One that I play is called the Magic Circle of Infinity. The music's written in a circle. Very difficult to play. You have to memorize these things. So I wrote this piece with this notion that I was going to put it onto a form, a visual score, but hadn't had the idea yet. So once I drew it, it emerges from interlocking infinity loops. One goes from the inside of the circle to the outside, and then the next one goes on the outside limb. So there's a lot going on here. 86 turns.
By the way, I'm joining now on my phone here. I'm pulling a little audible just because, man, this internet issue at my house is a serious
That's
deal.
Okay.
Let me get myself. Where am I? Ethan Janney, host, me. Okay, that's me. I guess I'm the host now. What else do I need to make sure I'm spotlighted? Add spotlight. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. You can see me and hear me okay right now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Phone version. I caught most of that, and also you and I discussed it earlier. So
Yeah. And so anyway, the piece itself is composed onto that form. And that's the gist of it. I have a very nice written out version that I play. And that movement I memorized pretty quickly. So that's actually not a problem. I could play it with this in front of me now, but it would be a little difficult to follow. So anyway. Yeah.
Tell us. So I'd always love to get some background on the guests. But I'm kind of encouraged or inspired to dive into some of this overlap with, piano technology before we even go there. So, we had a kind of a pre-interview conversation, and it was fascinating. I asked you, hey, we're going to be on a show in front of a lot of piano technicians. Do you have any interesting overlaps there? And you jumped, chomping at the bit. You had some very interesting collaborations with piano technicians and pianos and things like that. So, dive into this. Tell me what's been your experience being a performer and working with piano technicians.
Well, I was actually thinking about this, that, one of the first initial experiences I had was when I was around 11 or so. The instrument I grew up working with was not really great, as most can say. I had worked a long time before I got a really good instrument to work with. But that particular piano had some super flimsy action and all this stuff. And so it was a baby grand, but it was sort of cobbled together, and it wasn't a really great instrument. So one of the things that happened when I got my debut performance at the Fine Arts Center was I played a concert grand, a Steinway concert grand, and I thought, there are some problems here. The weight of the keys, like there's a whole different mechanism that's at play here. And so I talked to the tuner together with my dad, and he placed weights underneath the keys, and it didn't really solve that. We ended up taking them out later, but it is an interesting thing that's how soon it started, because I always viewed it. My father is a trained luthier, so he initiated this idea that when an instrument needs work, you talk to an expert and get the work done, right? And so I was always watching him in his shop and everything else that goes into that, building and repairing instruments. But he doesn't do anything with piano. It's all stringed instruments. And, fast forward many, many years, I met one of my closest colleagues in undergrad, and he's a premier technician and tuner in Colorado named David Hebert. And I collaborated with him on the recording for Centaur Records. And we hadn't worked together for years, but the resources, the resource in the technician to me is just immeasurable. What we did was we reacquainted ourselves together basically at 1 o'clock in the morning in the practice room. He was working on all their instruments as part of his help pay for school plan. And he was also doing his apprenticeship at the time. So I learned a lot about instruments, but I also learned that once he was done voicing an instrument, he'd ask me to play something. So I'd always go in and play some elaborate Chopin etude or something that really tested the whole breadth of the sonority and everything, and plus the action, and how quickly he could affect little changes and things like that. Again, fast forward a few years to when we collaborated for the recording, you have things that are possible already just because of the nature of the instrument I was working with. At that point, it was a Blüthner Model 1, and the resonant qualities, just this profound piano to start with. And so I thought, wait a minute, a little bit more sound here, and I need a little bit more space here. How do I get this sound to clear a little bit here? And he's like, well, you've got to work with the instrument closer because the Blüthner is so resonant, which was wonderful. And so all these things lead me to a very close relationship with the technician and tuner. And so whenever I have that opportunity, I bounce ideas off of the professionals.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and we sort of alluded to this on the program several times, or even stated it directly. And I always like this concept. I think it came up during our interview with Eric Chu and Eric Johnson, when they were talking about pedaling and some of these things and how they work together. But it might have come somewhere else. This concept that, you know, the performance is a collaboration between more people than just the performer, right? It's the piano manufacturer, it's the piano technician, right?
So much.
And all these things need to come together to make the sound great. And, you know, maybe they don't come together. Maybe the technician isn't in on the planning or the thinking behind it. And, you know, maybe you don't have a great piano made by a great manufacturer, and so they're kind of not in on it either, right? But when you can really intentionally bring all these parties in to optimize, you know, what kind of music is made, that's really brings you something special. And it also reminds me of this theme that just comes over and over again, which again in our pre-interview I noticed with you, is that some of the greats in all the fields, so I would almost say all of the greats in all the fields, they all have this quality where they just pay attention to detail, right? They take into account some of the things that you just might think don't even matter, but they're paying attention to them. And there you go, right? The piano itself, the technician, musician, having them all collaborate, coming together, thinking about these fine details, not only as individuals, but as a group. Wow, there's a lot of impact that can be made there.
There's an interesting part an interesting part of my training when I was doing a lot of improvising and I'm playing a lot of jazz in undergrad, that quite a number of years ago, but I worked very closely with a bassist who was both an extraordinary guitarist and teacher and musician and had just so much experience. But one of the very key things was learning to tune a band and learning to understand how to listen to when somebody's matching your pitch. Where is that curve and when is it aligning? And I tell you, when you learn to play collaboratively and chamber music per se, when you go then and play solo, you are listening to everything a lot more closely. And the interaction of sounds on the type of music I play primarily now is so high and so tight, the frequencies, no matter how quietly or loud and how dissonant or sparse, it's imperative that you listen to how those sounds interact and everything from the movement that you create the sound with. So the movement and all the sound, it's all originating here, you know, and then going from there. So, and it brings me to this one exercise that we always think about. When I have a student in the studio, especially one that can really hear, I ask them to walk across the room and play one pitch, and then ask them to tell me when they hear the end of the pitch. And it's a game I learned from the great Heinrich Neuhaus, who supposedly gave that as an exercise when he was auditioning to the greatest pianists of the 20th century. And it's a fascinating thing to understand where and how far that resonant quality and wavelength goes. So to truly listen to that when you're playing takes time. It necessitates adjusting tempos, all of that, of course, for the action of the instrument as well. But those resonant qualities, those are what should be dictating how we play. And therefore, you can never play the same way twice, and especially not when you're playing a different instrument. So when we had the opportunity in a recording session with the same instrument on such delicate, finely tuned sounds, and I have a technician there with me who's really biting at the bit to make sure this instrument is just on point, I'm all ears, you know?
Yeah. Now, is the piece that we're talking about now, the one where you collaborate with a technician, is that the one that you just shared with me potentially to play, or is that a different one? I said the one I'm thinking of, the YouTube link that you just showed me. Is that
Energy?
Yeah, is that collaboration or is that different?
That's different, but that is actually a very interesting one. That's a house concert series in North Carolina, and the gentleman that I work with closely there, he is an organ builder and a very fine technician and tuner himself. And that's a late 19th century Knabe wonderful piano. I mean, I've played everything from Brahms piano trio in B major, everything, Beethoven, Appassionata, Waldstein, all these, all the way up to the most contemporary stuff, Shevsky, George Crumb, everything. And the response on that instrument is amazing. The clarity of the sonorities and stuff, especially in the bass register. And so that particular piano and that particular situation, it's again very unique. But that particular place, he prefers a kind of Victorian temperament, and we've talked about this a number of times. And it's interesting how those very, very slight things can make some of that music feel a little bit different. And I mean, of course, it is that way under different hands every time, but you know.
So I definitely want to listen to some of your music on the call here today. I know that my computer will not be able to handle it. I can tell that already. But I did forward, Emrys, I did forward some of these links to you, and maybe we can pull an audible and maybe you could share some of them. Emrys, can you
Yeah, definitely.
can you see those emails that I forwarded you by any chance?
Yes. Yep, I got them.
So you know, you could take a minute to set up while maybe we explore another question, but I think the one that we want to go with first is the one that was a reply to a Zoom, to the Zoom in, the initial reply to the Zoom invite. And it has his bio as well as the link. So if you just like load up that video, we'll do the whole thing, you know, make sure it's loaded on your computer and then let us know, and we'll bring that up and share it if possible.
Yep, I have it up if you want me to go ahead and share.
Yeah, I mean, if it seems ready, then yeah, go ahead and pull it up right now and we'll take a listen.
All right.
Actually, while you're before you press play, Alexander, could you give us a little bit of a preview of what we are going to listen to?
Yes. So this piece is the final movement of a suite I composed called Liquid Piano, and I explored different forms that water takes on its journey in that piece. During that year, I was a part of a project that was spearheaded by a pianist in London called Climate Keys. And what she had her intention was to create a program where we would create concert experiences and feature specialized speakers in the field. So you could have anybody from an environmentalist to a lawyer to an extremely influential business person, but somehow this had to be something concerning environment and the evolution of our planet and what's happening right now. And so what I did for that one was I invited a geologist from the University of Oregon faculty, Greg Ritalik. He's one of the premier geologists, and he talked about deep time, etc. So that's where we premiered this piece. But this piece itself is it's a response to let's see. So outside of Socorro, New Mexico, we have one of the largest areas called the Very Large Array. These are gigantic radio dishes. They are on railroad tracks. I mean, I don't remember the details, like 500 tons a piece or something, ridiculously heavy. And they're able, with the movement of these dishes, which exist across miles of track, multiple of them, right? 27 dishes or something like that. They can position them in such a way to reach deep, deep into space. And they've told us about like experiences where they researched inside of, you know, black holes and such. It's far beyond my range of understanding. So what I did was use my imagination and go deep into this thing. And I created a composition that is, let me grab this really quick here.
Yeah, sure. And I'll check in, Emrys, just to check in with Emrys. You shared your audio when you did the screen share option, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just want to make sure.
So this is I created this piece of art.
Oh wait, let's
represent-
unshare your screen. Unshare your screen real quick, Emma, so we can see what he's showing. There you go.
So this is a piece of art that I just used I think that I was sitting in the car by the seaside back in Oregon, and I had this idea that I wanted to start this piece from the center, and I wanted it to look like it was something of an explosion of idea and representing this contacting of radio signals and all this stuff. And so I started from the middle point D on the piano, and each of the lines goes up and you read it clockwise. So they go up, and as you go around, you'll start going down the piano. So on the piano, you either go up or down, right or left. But at the same time, I wanted something a little bit more multidimensional than that. And so once you make your way around the entire thing, you arrive back at the beginning. So at the middle point, it's a flat line, basically, and it's a lot of like very close chromatic. And then it starts to descend to follow this point down here. So anyway, that's the form of what is more or less the theme. And then from that point, I believe that there's 7 waves, and waves are sort of like transformations or variations or so. It's like a variation, continuous variation type of a concept. And they're all basically working with the same pitches in a controlled manner, like the 12-tone compositional style of Arnold Schoenberg. A little bit more loose than that, but it's using those concepts. And so I built and designed the piece out of that, but each one of those waves explores like a slightly different genre and tempo and reflection and technical exploration of those same concepts. So
awesome. Yeah, we'll take a listen, and I'll just make a comment in that, yeah, like the artworks and like all the stuff that you're bringing into the equation. It's we'll talk a little bit more, and I want the audience to get to know you a little bit more, because I mean, you could look at this and be like, who is this guy? Like, what is he doing? He's writing pencils on a paper and calling it music or whatever. But
oh yeah,
I think if you're in the audience, you're kind of scratching your head. We're going to talk a little bit more about Alexander's, background and, where he's coming from. The guy's got perfect pitch. He has a very nuanced approach to music and, kind of sensory input. And I think my goal here is to take some of the stuff that we're looking at where it's like, we're actually a lot closer to, I think, accessing you and your intentions and where the stuff all comes from than it might seem. At least, I don't know, but we're going to get into it. But I think listening to some music is a strong part of that. So Emrys, go ahead and bring that recording back up, and we'll take a listen. Thanks for the setup there. right, thank you for that.
Absolutely.
So we got a little bit of your background in your bio. And so just to recap, you have a musical family. You mentioned your father was a luthier and instrumentalist. What and as I mentioned briefly, you have a very acute ear. I always like to try to find out, what the decision to have a career in music, like how did that actually come about? For you, I can see, maybe it just felt almost inevitable just because you have such a relationship with sound, but maybe not. Maybe you had some other pathways that you were considering. Tell me about coming up as a musical person and eventually making this decision that, you're going to go down a musical career path.
I came into the world pretty much playing. I mean, at 2, I started playing violin and was already playing. I played long enough. I always think about this as like, I must have played violin well into 8 or 9 years old, because I played in youth orchestra. I played fiddle contests. I did all kinds of stuff like that. But I know that my point of entry into the world of piano was around 4 or so, 4.5, because my dad described it like, yeah, I went to the instrument because I could see it there, and I was fascinated by all these patterns and things that I could see, like the way that the 2-3-2-3 works out for the black keys. And this is still my fascination today, is the organization and the way in which your hands interact with the keyboard, the organization, the outward layout of the keys. There's just so many things to think about with this thing. And now, with an idea that I want to write that is compositionally interesting, I'm also working with, how does this fit in your hand? It's coming from what Chopin left us with the way in which your long fingers sit more comfortably on the black keys, et cetera, et cetera. But I was fascinated by the patterns. I gravitated towards piano. Shortly after that, he found that my ear was such that I was slower than my brother, for instance, on violin with the intonation, because he said I always went to the exact pitch and I would not stop until it was in tune and right. And so my scales weren't moving maybe as quickly as he thought they should be or something, but everything was like spot on. And so one day he decided to send me down the hall and fire out a couple of pitches and tell me what are the names of these pitches. And that's when he more or less described as having discovered I had perfect pitch. But that's more of a nuisance than anything when you're talking about working with the piano, because it's equally out of tune. So I love all those aspects of sound and the way in which it works. But there were points in my life where it became way too much, like the cognitive dissonance in my adolescence, the unfortunate experiences in my, in my early teen years, I had lost my mother when I was 12. And so that just threw me into cacophony, and that cognitive dissonance made it pretty difficult to want to focus on music for a little while. But nonetheless, since I was a young child, I was pretty certain that was where I was headed, because that's where I lived in my head. And he always told me to practice, and I would find ways to practice that would kind of kill time. So while I was working on my Mozart sonatas, when I was like, whatever, 9, 10, however old it was, I sat underneath the piano and started playing them backwards like this. And then people found out I could do that and would call me out at a party and be like, hey, I heard you can play Bach's Invention like this. And so I went and played the D minor Invention backwards like that. But I don't do that anymore right now. Maybe I should. But there's other things to be done.
That's one of those
that led me down
the
road.
If you want like a viral video, I think that's probably part of it. Yeah.
My favorite videos is a pianist. He's sitting on the bench backwards, and his hands are on the keyboard this way, and he's doing leg lifts while he's playing something backwards. I can't remember what it is, but it's something by Bach. And I was like, yeah, that's right where I need to be, because we were talking about Goggins.
Nice.
Anyway, so that's where I just felt like it was inevitable that I was headed down that road, because I kept finding more and more that I wanted to stay with the instrument and the music. I participated in my first composition competition around like 12 years old. right around the time when I won the Stars of Tomorrow, and that's when I made a debut of sorts in Colorado Springs and began studies at Colorado College after that. However, the teacher I worked with directly before that, I recently came back into contact with in 2018. He's a longtime professor at Stanford, unbelievable artist, and it was just one of the most wonderful reconnections I've had. I had the great fortune of just playing for his festival there in this past August again, and it has been really wonderful to reconnect there because, I mean, he was in his doctoral studies and coming to Colorado Springs to teach me and maybe one other student or so during that time in my life. And so then look, you know, how the tide turns. And so I wouldn't think of career per se, but I also am self-taught on accordion, and I played a lot of that music, folk music, throughout all those years as a utilitarian resource, basically to make cash from very young with my dad and my brother at big festivals and whatever. I mean, it was a lot of fun, but it's just like, you know, the accordion is like weightlifting. But that was nonetheless important aspects of playing music, in my opinion. I still have such a love for folk music, bluegrass, all different kinds of styles, because I mean, that's the bread and butter of what this great music that people refer to all the time is coming from. I mean, if you really want to get down to what the origins of, especially when you're talking about some of Beethoven's greatest music and other composers, you need to look no further. I mean, it's right there. Or the bird with Mozart, they always talk about, right? Well, we know that birds are full, and we have a, you know, incredible resource there for sure. So once it became like much more clear that I was going to go on and do something with it, you know, fellowships and scholarships and a lot of practice and entering competitions, always to try to best my own possibilities, never to compete against others. That's the same way that I race as a trail runner. I mean, you know, it's about what you can achieve in this world, and I needed it. I'm an auditory human, and that's where I am. And so it's both difficult because it's imperfect, and I mean, I just had my tuner in the studio yesterday. I was like, I need this. And he's like, yeah, come on, can you wait till tomorrow? I mean, but my point is that, you know, we have to play. So sometimes the instrument is woefully out of tune, and, you know, it just, that's the way it is. And so it can't ever be determined by the quality of the piano. And the rule is that it's never the piano, it's always the pianist. So no matter what, we're going to play a different instrument almost every time. There is a lot of nerve and, you know, anxiety involved in that, especially when you're talking about playing in concert halls where you just don't know what you're going to see. And who prepared the piano, if it was prepared at all. I played a piano in Brazil, and this is nothing against anyone, but it was one of the worst instruments I've ever played. I had to play Bach Goldberg variations. I had played a lot of different, very technically demanding pieces on this piano. Every key was out of regulation. And I mean, I thought this was going to be a nightmare. It turned out to be one of my best concert experiences because I listened to every single thing more closely than I think I ever had to.
Interesting.
You know, when you think about playing out of the decay of the pitch, this is like, becomes very problematic when you don't know exactly what's going to happen right next door.
Yeah.
You're playing a scale. So
yeah,
it's a very fascinating thing. And that's why I have a career, I think. That's the reason why I'm still playing, is that my interest is piqued.
Yeah. I've had a conversation with a handful of people about this, especially from a technician's perspective, you know, and from a musician's perspective. Yeah, the best players, whatever instrument you give them, to make music on it, you know. And yes, they'll strive to get the best instrument in the best condition they can. But once it's go time, you know, once it's performance beat, the downbeat, you got to focus on that instrument and making it the best it can be. Yeah. I'm actually hoping to find some time. I think I'm going to squeeze it in the next week or two to record an album that starts on an out of tune piano and finishes on an in tune piano. So each successive song, I work on the instrument a little bit in between. I compose things that are based on the instrument's present condition, and so I'll more on that later. So I'll have some time to do that. Let's talk about synesthesia. I want to talk about that, and I became fascinated with this concept a while ago, over a decade ago, I think at this point, out of my interest in neuroscience and this kind of fascinating domain, which I think really is only came to be understood in recent decades, right? I think in the past, it's been something where it was very confusing to people. And so it crosses many domains, but synesthesia, for those who haven't learned about it, it's when you have a sort of a cross-modal interaction in the brain, cross-sensory interaction. So if I hear something and it evokes a color in my visual field, or there's some of the craziest ones are, somebody tastes something and they have a color, right? Like, oh, I eat chicken and it's orange, and you're like, what the heck are you talking about? And these are real experiences that people have. Where, and it's, they don't know exactly how it works, but you can imagine these domains in the brain have to be connected. And it's basically either increased activity or increased connections that may cause it, or a decrease of inhibition. So the brain has a mechanism to inhibit certain things from happening. Like when you're asleep, your brain inhibits you from, perceiving everything that's going on so you can still sleep. And then when you wake up, the inhibition goes away. So it could be that these domains are already connected, but in people that have these experiences, there's just less inhibition. So tell us about, I don't know how deep it goes. We didn't get too deep into it previously, but tell us about your experience, your synesthetic experiences.
It's everything in the world is sound, and it is all interesting. I mean, in growing up and playing in the dirt and always being fascinated with the trail from a very young age, hiking, mountain biking, whatever it is, I always connected what is the sound that I'm seeing. In other words, like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, there's as much smelling going on when I'm perceiving that way as this. Like, I'm looking with my eyes, but I'm hearing more of what I'm looking at than it's constantly crossed all the time is all I can say. And I had nobody really necessarily embraced it and talked about it as a tool or as a real benefit to existence or something like that. But I always knew it was there, and I always knew it was something more than what it was being made to be. And there was this one point when I met Falco Steinbach, and he was definitely the first artist that I met that was truly engaged in this thinking. And I was very fascinated by that. And I thought, okay, to what extent, whatever. I mean, I was already older. I was already in my early 20s, but I thought, this is an artist that I've got to think about, because this is not like, you read about this with Scriabin, but then they call him crazy and move on. Like, nobody understands exactly what he was dealing with, because they wanted to say, now, come on now, let's just move on here. And so, recently when we had Christopher Taylor here to play his piano concerto and the Eugene Symphony, they commissioned from Harmonic Labs, which is a great collective of some incredible artistic minds here. They created an organ basically where they would play a pitch and it would cast a color. And so when they played his music, they did it the way that he intended to, and it was really fascinating. Now, my point, after having all the experience I have had and finding and really working to find the kind of sound that I'm looking for as a composer, how do I really voice those chords in Brahms or Chopin or Schoenberg or Crumb or Shevsky, what is the meat of the sound? How do you find that? Like, once you've really trained that thinking, you go a little bit outside of just using your inspiration. But once you're inside of it, you can listen and experience sound like you're inside of it. And so there's always this thing that has been present there for me artistically, and I create art to represent that, because that's where I find certain hues and certain densities of colors. I've found my preferred, timbres and so on and so forth. Those things exist that way. But my goal as an artist is to give back what was given to me. So I had to teach it. And from the beginning, I thought, well, how am I going to teach this to a kid who doesn't know how to read or anything like that? Well, I gave him a blank piece of paper, drew a keyboard on there, and sent him home and said, next week, please show me how you hear each of these pitches. It may change, but just try to make a decision and look at the color wheel and understand what might this sound represent in color. It's just another way to understand. It's a process of association thing. And as we know, the more that you can attach to, the more meanings and multiple meanings, like abstraction, that you can attach to each of these things we're trying to learn, the better you're going to know it and become it, and it becomes you. So it was really profound with a couple of students, one particularly because he has perfect pitch as well. And he just giggled right away, and he did amazing things with it. And we talk about it as we're working through some of Chopin's most difficult etudes or whatever, like inside of these unbelievably dense and technically involved rhythm and keyboard configuration, just whatever, moving all over the instrument. I have specific preludes I love because of how Chopin worked with the texture and the particular register and such. And so we'd talk about it and be like, what is that color? Because there's every tone you can think of. There's a whole myriad of sound in front of you or in you. And yet there is a hue there. And it's like what we were talking about the other day, when dealing with Franz Liszt, you have to understand he also viewed certain harmonies very, very consciously as, like, F sharp major is a very deep spiritual orange, like burnt orange type of a sound. And when you hear that sound, I mean, that's this, like, when you hear that sound, that's exactly the same sound that Schubert wrote in his third Impromptu in Opus 90. But is it? Because that's G flat major. And like you said the other day, when you look at that, oh yeah, you just transpose it to G major, it'll be easier to play, right? It's not even remotely the same music. First off, it's not on the black key. Second of all, it does not have that warmth. G major is just a very different sound. So it's a very interesting thing that way. And with inharmonic equivalence, and the way that when I started playing music, I was playing a stringed instrument. Thus, we have problems with intonation. Because still to this day, when I'm rehearsing with quartets or orchestra or whatever, this is a real problem. You have to find how do you ask for what you need if you're looking for something to be in tune? Is it really just play in tune? No. There's a way that you think of the upper side of the pitch, or this, like, the leading tone has to be a little bit higher. Well, how do you explain that aside from saying just 2 cents higher? It's not like that. It's like you have to think like singers talk about this head voice or something, lifting on the face, lifting on the jaw, like feeling this lift. There's these things that happen with sound. It's just beyond the sound itself.
Yeah.
So I represent it in art so that I can then translate that into sound. And it has brought audiences great joy, I've been told, a number of years now, that when they see a piece, because I develop visual artwork out of problems that I'm perceiving in the composition or something that I'm going to work on in a composition I'm writing, and people catch on to it. It's fascinating.
I'm really excited to hear this other piece that we have potentially queued up here. So Emrys, I want you to cue it up, and I think maybe we'll just listen to a portion of it or something. You can tell us what we want to hear, but yeah. So this is like taking this sort of synesthetic concept even to a different, almost like a tactile level on some cases as well, because you created a piece that is poetic, inspired by poetry, but also very like mechanically inspired by the computer keyboard and the act of writing and typing. So yeah, please explain this a little bit, and then we'll take a listen to that in a moment as well. So get that queued up. That's just that second link. Emrys, let us know if you need help finding it. Synergy.
The synergy? Yeah.
Yeah, synergy. Yeah,
Well,
go
so
ahead. Go ahead and explain.
This piece originates as the commission to honor George Crumb, and I had to think first off, what really is going on, because I love his music and I play it, but how much of it are you really understanding per se when you're learning it, as opposed to just doing what you're being told to do on the score? Because his scores are loaded. Every note has like 2 or 3, commands and directions going on. So listen closely and you hear triads. You hear blurring of triads in the deep bass with full pedal submersed, like there is no lifting of that pedal, and it's all overtones and mixture of sound, but these are triads in like a first inversion or something. So I start thinking like, what are we trying to do here? And then for the second section, what is that? I'm sorry, for the first section, one more time, my primary material derived from a transcription I did of the common bird, the robin, the red-breasted robin. And I've loved the sound of this bird forever. And there's something very, like, it oscillates between pitches. There's these little graces, and it's the sound of the evening for me. There's some things with this sound. So that's a very major motive in the first movement. Second movement, I transposed, so I superimposed. I took a block of wood that was the span of 2-octave span on the piano keyboard, drew a keyboard on it, a piano keyboard, and then transposed all the letters and symbols from the QWERTY keyboard to represent the ability to try to play the piano as a typewriter. I initially conceived it to try to play it on the toy piano, but it didn't do anything for me. So from that point, I transcribed note for note, letter for letter, Lewis Carroll's Jabberwocky. And it is just, it was so much fun, but it took a lot of time and transformations to find exactly how to meld and get as close as possible to the linguistic aspects of the translation that I was trying to capture as well. Through the rhythm of the sound, through the density of the sound. There's one kicker in there again. Every time the tone D above middle C sounds, that's the space bar. So any place in that entire piece where that sounds, that's a space bar. And I first throw that idea of this superimposition of the QWERTY keyboard in the first movement by transposing and translating George Crumb's date of birth. And that motive it's the first point where it gets really dark and deep before kind of the final statement of the piece. Anyway, and so then I transposed all 7 stanzas of the poem for the second part.
I haven't heard this yet, but just some other things I'm going to be looking out for. The poetry, has some, I don't know how much has been studied, but poetry has some commonalities with music, repetitions, themes, variations, and choruses, and, forms, A, B, and things like this. And I think what I'll be interested to listen for myself is where you're hearing the sort of musical structure of poetry, not the prosody, well, maybe a little bit of the prosody, I guess, but more the modular, I guess, call it aspect, right? Because there's words. You're going to hear words, and words that are used again, you're going to hear that sound of the word, you won't know what word it is, but you can hear it again. I'm really interested to hear how those get distributed.
And one thing really quickly, the most important thing I think that I discovered in time, aside from the D being the space bar, is the fact that every time when you're typing and you need a capital letter, you need to do two combinations of keys, the shift and then that letter or that symbol or something. So every single time you hear an outside grace note, that's a shift key. And it just makes the whole experience sort of kind of comical. It's like comedy of errors in a certain sense. And I naturally, in transcribing this, thought so much about the Italian street theater, you know, the figures like Pierrot and Harlequin and these figures from the Renaissance. And so I thought about how much of that drama was included in the music of composers like Debussy and otherwise, to illustrate ideas. And here we have a Jabberwocky, or we have the warbling and whiffling and these kinds of things, right? And those are the aspects of combinations of letters into words, and then finding the right way of expressing that you know, it took time to find. So I hope you enjoy.
Wow, intense.
Yeah.
I'm back on my computer now. Just in time for my phone to die, which is kind of weird there. Guess I have the internet back. Wow, we got a chance to get through a lot of stuff. It went by very quickly. You got a lot of stuff to share about. So we did as much as we could today.
Absolutely.
And we started a little bit late, but it's been a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for kind of giving us some insights into your world and how you think about music and the piano as an instrument. I think one of my takeaways as a piano technician, especially, it became an emerging theme in my mind as you were talking about sound and maybe establishing how to listen for things, is I kept thinking about the fact that a lot of piano technicians these days are using an electronic device to tune pianos. And they are tuning visually, which is in its own sense a cross-modal type of a thing. So they're looking at a dial on a screen to kind of figure out whether the pitch is where it's supposed to be, and the computer's helping them calculate where it's supposed to be. And sometimes that forces us to use our ears a bit differently, or maybe use them less as technicians. So I think that if anybody's encouraged that tends to use a device to tune the piano, to just maybe do or make up some of these type of exercises, to really immerse your ears in the sound of the piano, I think that would be a great outcome here. Just take out a sheet of paper and make the keyboard and listen to some notes and some chords and do some creative, coloring or whatever you want to do of associating with the sounds on the piano. I think you can only gain from those type of exercises, especially in a profession here where sound is so important, and at the high level, the nuances are really what matter. So, anyways, that's one of my big takeaways here. Any comments on that or final things you wanted to share before we start to wrap up?
I think that's it. I think that's pretty well summarized there. Yeah.
All right, excellent. I hope my signal's coming through okay. I realize my internet's been terribly spotty today, but yeah, it looks like it's not doing very well. But I'm gonna do my best at doing an outro here. Hopefully it comes across. Can you hear me okay right now, or not really? Yeah. Okay. Here we go. We're gonna do the outro and then we'll say goodbye for the day. So this has been Piano Tech Radio Hour. It's the end of another musical journey here, and we want to thank Alexander Schwarzkopf for joining us today. As always, we're brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, cutting edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. If you join us today by signing up for the session individually, make your life more convenient by subscribing to PTRH at $16 a month. Get the recording of today's session, our member area automatic registration for each week's news session. Sign up at bit.ly/join PTRH. That's bit.ly/join PTRH. And make sure to follow us on socials, check out our blog, check out the Radio Hour podcast, and check out our micro convention coming up here in June on the 20th. We'll have Mark Sarasano talking about some of these technical aspects of kind of measuring your sort of ear and your tuning. We'll have Jim Wilson sharing some tips and tricks from all the experts that he's been in contact with over the years. And we'll have some more great content for you as well. So make sure you sign up for that. And we look forward to bringing you on board there. All right. Without further ado, we'll say goodbye for the day and tune in again next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time. Remember that you can catch us live online every Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
That's right. Go to pianotechradio.com to register so you can interact live and ask questions of our guests.
See you next week.